So, Chapter 10 of this unit, Unit 4, Animal Systems, involves a discussion about the human digestive system. So, luckily for you, you will have seen this in grade 10. And so, a good chunk of what we're seeing today is review, but also an extension of concepts you're already fairly familiar with. So, let's get started. So, first off, I want to remind you that there are two distinct types of digestion that we typically speak about. And so the first one is what we call mechanical. So mechanical breakdown simply means like physically breaking down your food into smaller pieces, right? And so there are various places within our digestive system where our food is being physically broken down into small little itty bits. So one good example of that is that our teeth are going to chew food. Um, we also know that our tongue can help shape that food into a ball called a bolus before we swallow it. So those are a couple of examples of mechanical digestion. There's also chemical digestion, right? And so chemical digestion results from a chemical reaction where macromolecules are broken down into smaller subunit pieces by the use of enzymes, which of course are protein molecules that help to speed up chemical reactions. So just to differentiate for you, mechanical versus chemical digestion, and I hope to that is part of your mindset as we work through the various aspects of digestion today. All right, so here is a fairly simple sort of grade 10 level look at the human digestive system. And what I want you to do is see if, and you can also opt to print off this slide and see if you can, how many of those pieces that you can actually label. And I'd be curious to know how you did with it. Like how many of them were you able to label, or were you able to label them that maybe you put the labels in the wrong spot? All right, so pause the video until you've accomplished that, and when you're ready to move on, then just resume the video. Okay, so the magic of technology allows me to instantly put in uh, the little descriptors as well as the labels. Focus mostly on the labels because we are going to be going through the descriptions of the anatomical components of the digestive system. So just to go through them really briefly. So we have the mouth here, salivary glands. That one you might not have gotten, but we'll definitely be discussing it today. The pharynx is the word sort of for the throat. I want you to take a really close look at this flap here because we're going to be discussing it as well, and it may have come up last year. So then we have our esophagus, stomach, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and anus. So hopefully you did okay with that. But essentially what we're going to be doing today is taking a tour of all of these component parts of the human digestive system. Okay, so in a worksheet today, prior to the screencast, you would have seen you would have been asked to list the 4 stages of the digestive process. So take a minute to see if you can remember them. So first we have a little diagram to help you think about it. Okay. So the first part of the digestive process is that taking in of food, and we call that ingestion. The second part is actual digestion, which involves the breaking down of food. Absorption, which means the transfer of any nutrient particles into the bloodstream. As well as some other components as well. And then eventually elimination or egestion, which means getting rid of any unused pieces or byproducts of the digestive process. Okay, so we're going to talk about ingestion first. And we're going to again come back to and differentiate between mechanical and chemical levels of digestion happening at this stage. So ingestion, of course, we see somebody eating a nice piece of pizza, chewing it up, rolling it into a ball with their tongue, and then swallowing it. So, that mechanical and chemical digestion actually begins in the mouth. Food is first of all going to be chewed, and our nice fancy word for that is masticated, right? So, how long does it take you to masticate? Should take, most people tend to chew their food quickly and swallow, but ideally you want to, chew about 20 times. And in that process of chewing your food, you're also forming it into a ball. And that name, we already spoke about this earlier, but here it is defined for you, a bolus. A bolus is just that ball that you form your food into after chewing it so that it can be swallowed easily without choking. So those are our mechanical digestion pieces here. I wanted to, oops, I think I missed something. Give me a second here. And so next we come to chemical digestion. And so take a look at this little image that I have here. Think about what is going on. So I'm hoping that you notice that the diagram here looks like there's some salivary glands just producing saliva and sort of injecting it into the mouth. That's what I'm hoping that you saw, right? So, well, what is saliva, right? When you think about saliva, what do you think about? I'm hoping you think, well, it's like a watery substance that somehow makes its way into our mouth fairly frequently. What you may or may not know is that besides the water, there's also some mucus in there that's in our saliva and also a digestive enzyme called amylase, which I'm going to talk about. Okay, so the role of each of these components is very important. So the water moistens the food. What might be the function of the mucus? Well, the mucus is there. Mucus is typically slippery, and so the mucus allows for us to swallow our food without choking, right? Allows that food to move from our mouth down to and into our esophagus with ease, right? Now the last little piece is that amylase that I mentioned, and amylase, any molecule you see with the name ase at the end, has a good chance of being being an enzyme in general. In this case, amylase is an enzyme that breaks down starch into some simpler sugars. So it's too bad we're not in class. If we were in class, I would say, and maybe this is something you can try at home, is I would say find a piece of white bread, and which is a starch, which is what amylase is going to break down, and just chew it and chew it and chew it and chew it until you can't chew it anymore. And the idea is that that digestive process is happening in your mouth. Amylase is already chemically breaking down your starch into a simple sugar, like for instance maltose. And maltose, you'll remember from yesterday's lesson, is a disaccharide composed of glucose. So it should start to taste kind of sweet. That's the idea. Okay. So food, in order for us to be able to taste our food, it has to be mixed with saliva. And the reason is that our taste buds can't actually kind of detect the taste without the presence of that. So I've got a couple pictures here. Oof, my face is disappearing. Let me see what I can do about that. Nope. I can see here, you can see this looks like an inflamed taste bud. And this picture here on the right of it is just a zoomed in microscope view of the taste bud, which I think is kind of cool. All right, so now let's take a look at these salivary glands. You can choose to print this off if you want, but you are responsible for it. So I liked this particular diagram rather than the one in your textbook because it shows you sort of like the side view as well as the frontal view, so you can see them. So, we have three primary salivary glands. One is the parotid gland. The other one is are the submandibular glands. You can see them there. So, there we go, one on each side. And then the sublingual. So I'm going to help you remember some of these names by using just language. Sub means below, right? Like think submarine. So when I'm looking at and sublingual, the sub is telling me it's below something, right? So lingual, think language, tongue, and that's what lingual actually means. So sublingual means below the tongue. So we have our sublingual glands and ducts leading from our sublingual glands just to below our tongue. And I'm going to show you something about that in a little bit. Now let's look at the next one, submandibular. So your jawbone is your mandible, and that's the kind of fancy sciencey word for it. So submandibular means below your jaw sort of thing. So that's where you're going to find them. There's our submandibular glands, and of course there's a duct leading from the submandibular gland into the mouth as well. Now the parotid gland, you're just going to have to remember those, but just remember that each of these sets of glands appears symmetrically. If we kind of draw a line through the front of one's face, we have like a mirror image of those glands on either side. So there we go about that. If you have any questions, by the way, just a reminder that I am available on Zoom all day long. Just join our Zoom meeting link for the day, and I will be there to help you out. Now, here's my question. Does anybody know what you're looking at right now? I'm hoping that some of you guessed that this is a Gleek. It's what is officially named a Gleek, but there we can see pretty quickly that we're looking at the sublingual glands, and then the ducts delivering that saliva just underneath the tongue, right? Sublingual, right underneath the tongue. All right, that's enough of that disgustingness. Moving right on. Okay, so now I want to talk about the esophagus. And so the esophagus, we know, is essentially, a tube. And its job is essentially to take that bolus of food that our tongue has nicely rolled and compacted and to move it down, to the stomach, deliver it to the stomach. So essentially the esophagus's job is to, provide a way of transporting food that you've chewed up and begin to digest chemically to your stomach for further digestion. But it moves by a process called peristalsis. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few pictures to help you visualize this. But this is rhythmic, which means there's a rhythm to it. It's periodic. It happens in waves that we don't control, hence the involuntary. And they're waves of muscular contractions. So here's a good kind of first look at it. It gets sort of simplified. Where you can see, just look really closely at the muscles on the side, pushing that bolus of food down. I'm going to tell you a little bit more, show you a little bit more about this. So I've got a couple of other diagrams here. This one on the left is from your textbook. And I want us to look at this first, and then maybe see if we can see some of the elements of these descriptions in this animation. So first of all, you should know that your esophagus, so this is your esophagus. Imagine that you're like lying down, I guess is the idea here. You have two sets of muscles. You have longitudinal muscles, so see the word long in there. That means they go kind of along the same direction as your esophagus. But then you also have circular muscles. And so the longitudinal muscles are going to push along your esophagus, and they're going to contract. And when you contract a muscle, you kind of squish it together. And so that makes it thicker. So we can see that thickening here along the walls of the esophagus. Now, what we can also begin to see at the front end here is the contraction of those circular muscles. It's a little bit more pronounced over here in this diagram, where we can see it's almost like a sphincter of sorts, where it's just contracting in sort of like a ring-like form. And so that repeated motion of the contraction and then the longitudinal muscles, contraction, longitudinal muscles, helps to push that bolus of food down to the opening of the stomach. So you can sort of see that here, where there appears to be just kind of sequentially that ring sort of closing in on your bolus of food, and with the help of those longitudinal muscles, just kind of bringing it down to the stomach. Okay, so that is it for ingestion. Before we get into digestion, what I'd like us to do is just to take a bit of a break, give yourself a little bit of a breather, get some fresh air, and then come back when you're ready. Maybe stop into our Zoom meeting to say hi or to ask any questions that you might have. And we'll see you soon.